Pacers center Myles Turner goes on Adrian Wojnarowski's podcast and talks about a ton of stuff. Would he do the Lakers deal, the business of the NBA, a bunch of topics that were very interesting to a lot of people. We'll talk about that, plus the Pacers' loss in Brooklyn to the Nets tonight and Chris Duarte's explosion against the Nets, all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
Our Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today has become quite the packed show. It was going to be about the end of the Pacers road trip, their game in Brooklyn, a story from that game, and that still will be included, but the day was taken over on the news front in Pacerland by Myles Turner going on Adrian Wojnarowski's podcast in New York with Woj, talking about a lot of stuff that was very interesting. And a lot of the show, 20 of the 30 minutes, was pretty positive stuff about Turner, his career, the Pacers right now, their youth. But the first 10 minutes was all about moves, the Lakers, things that were very interesting to hear Myles Turner's perspective on, and some of it was in a way that fans did not like. We'll talk about all of that. We'll also talk about Pacers Nets. Pacers almost pull off a crazy 24-point comeback to close out their road trip, and Chris Duarte's wonderful 30-point explosion, a career high in Brooklyn. We'll get to all that today. Let's start with the Turner stuff, though. I usually like to start with games. This kind of weaves into the game because Turner was awful against Brooklyn on Monday night. We'll get to that as the show progresses, but I really would like to talk about what he said, my take on it. Mine is going to be different than everybody else's because I usually come from more of a team-building perspective, zoom out, use a lot of context, and I don't come from, like fans. I'll talk about this later. Fans will probably hate what Turner said more than a lot of other people, but we'll talk about the whole thing. It's very interesting. If you want to check it out, the Woj Pod, Adrian Wojnarowski interviews NBA players all the time. And again, they talked about the Pacers, Turner's career, the young, scrappy Pacers for like the last 20 minutes. All good stuff, all fantastic. You'll learn a lot about the Pacers and Myles Turner. And Myles Turner is a very good interviewee, by the way. One of my favorite guys to talk to on this team. The first 10 minutes of the show were talk from Woj and Myles about the Lakers rumors, Turner always being in trade rumors, stuff like that. And that's what caught everyone's attention. In fact, 45 seconds into this podcast, Woj asked Myles, if you're the Lakers, would you do this trade that's been reported, right? The reported Buddy Hield and Myles for Westbrook and to first trade. And like Myles even acknowledges later in the show that, after the Wizards game, when him and Hield both played fantastic on national TV, they were both laughing at some of the memes about, the Lakers and the potential trade and stuff on the team bus, right? Like, clearly there is some acknowledgement of all this stuff from him and Buddy. So that he's asked straight up, Myles, would you do this trade for the Lakers? Here's his full quote. He says, "That's such an interesting question. I think personally, when you look at this business of the league and knowing the landscape of the league, you have to go off your future. We all know picks are so valuable in this league. Someone like myself, I'm heading into the last year of my deal. You want to make sure you're getting a return for your assets, right? So if I'm the Lakers, I took a very hard look at this with the position that you're in. I know what I can provide for a team, my leadership, my shot blocking, my three-point ability, and just my ability to make plays out there on the floor. I'd take a very long look at it. As far as pulling the trigger, I get paid to shoot, not to make these calls. I couldn't answer that." So Myles Turner basically says, you have to think about your future. The Pacers do, the Lakers do, and I think I'm really good. I think I have a unique skill set that no one else has, but I don't get paid to make these decisions. And I think that is a good answer to that question, right? Because he talked about himself and why he thinks he could help the Lakers and why he's good, but he didn't say, I want to be on the Lakers, but he did say he understands why the Lakers would do it, right? He understands the future that the Pacers have to consider. You have to consider the return to your assets. He can help them win. Like, a lot of good answer, but specifically talking about the Lakers is, of course, not going to be something fans want to hear talked about, especially given that he's been in trade rumors in the past and that, this time it's different because his contract is ending at the end of the season. His contract with the Pacers expires at the end of the season. So while he's been in trade chatter before, this time the pressure's on of, can the Pacers keep him? And if not, What can they get for him? And that comes up later. I don't think the Lakers question and answer part was all that interesting. I'm not going to lie. Not that it wasn't interesting, hearing Myles Turner specifically talk about the situation of another team, but, saying that he thinks the Lakers should take a very hard look at this deal is certainly very noteworthy. But I didn't think it would, stun me. If you made me predict what he would say, I wouldn't be that far off of it. But this was the more interesting one. Woj asks later, a couple minutes later, Turner's been in the league forever. He's been in trade rumors and chatter all the time, basically since 2018-19, they get Sabonis. Then the next year, Sabonis is starting, and Batadze's on the team. The trade rumors for Turner have been constant since then, basically. And his answer to that question, right, on the league being a business and stuff like that, was much more interesting. Because at first he talked about, he knows his value, he knows he's talented. That's sort of the stuff he talked about last December when he was talking about wanting a bigger role, if you'll go back and remember that. But then he said, I quote, "I do also know that coming into a contract year as well, you can't lose me for nothing. They can't, lose me for anything," but I think he meant nothing. "They can't have the notion of me playing out this year. They don't trade me, and it's like, okay, say free agency comes around and I don't re-sign here. Let's just be real." And then that's just bad on the organization, them not making a powerful move at that. So if they do trade me and they do get assets for me coming along, they're doing what's best for them and just looking out for and doing what they're paid to do. There's no hard feelings with that. So that one I think is more interesting because Turner basically said, yeah, if I don't resign, the Pacers kind of should explore trading me, right? It would make sense for them. That's their job, to look at the future and say, hey, that sounds like something that he and the Pacers have talked about mutually. The understanding is there. The Pacers made a bunch of trades last year. Remember, this was confirmed by Carlisle and all the players. There was a meeting between Pacers Brain Trust and Karis LeVert, Brogdon, Sabonis, Turner about hey guys, we're changing direction. You're going to be in trade talks. That was almost a year ago now. And so Turner's been in these conversations for a while. It wouldn't surprise me that he knows this, but he just basically said yeah, this is the situation the Pacers and I are in. It makes sense for them to trade me and it's their job to think about stuff like that. So that was a little more interesting to me, but none of it's new, surprising info. That's why it's all just weird. The way this crosses my brain is weird. And I think it's odd because it's odd to hear a player talk so openly about trade stuff like this in the most candid way possible, right? I know they all know this stuff. They talk to their agents and teams about it. Players talk about this stuff. But just to hear it come in this setting is just very unusual and not something that's heard very often. But that said, Myles didn't say anything incorrectly. He explained the situation of every involved party really well, right? He understands the Lakers would like to get better. The Pacers can't lose him for nothing. He knows why he's been in trade rumors. All this stuff makes sense and is correct, but it's just really odd. In fact, he did a great job explaining why it's in the Pacers' best interest to consider trading him, but it's also weird that in the same 10-minute stretch, I haven't even gotten to this yet, he called the Lakers situation appealing, right? Comparing the big market of LA versus, the Midwest and the coverage that comes out there. And he also pitched why, in theory, the Lakers would make this trade. So that's all very odd and unique in the setting of the NBA. It's weird that question is being asked almost to me. Not it's Woj's job, right? I'm not criticizing anyone. It's just an odd sort of question now, 12 days into the season to me. But I'm not faulting any of the questions, and I'm not faulting Myles for answering what is asked to him, right? He did a good job of going through that. But what I can say is, here's the subtext that I think makes my perspective different than everyone else's. Maybe not everyone. Some people know this stuff. Myles Turner's extension eligible right now. Right now. He could sign a contract with the Pacers beyond the season today, tomorrow, the next day. He could sign a renegotiation extension through February 28th and get a raise this year, right? If he wanted to stay with the Pacers, there wouldn't be any of this talk about, I could, they could lose me for nothing. That'd be terrible, right? That's why they're consider trading me. If there was this third option that he was interested in, he would bring it up and say or I could sign with this team and be around. And maybe he does think that that's a possibility. But he didn't, that wasn't brought up, that wasn't talked about, and that wasn't included in the calculus. And that part always kind of whooshes me with the rest of this discussion, because if the extension was a part of this, it wouldn't be talked about so binary of lose me for nothing or trade me, right? There's a lot of other stuff in there. So as he talks about, the Pacers can't lose him for nothing. Well, unless he's saying the Pacers aren't offering him an extension at all and won't be offering him an extension in free agency, that sure seems like he's kind of saying, can't lose me for nothing. Kind of sounds like he's saying, I'll be exploring the market as a hint. And maybe he would still stay with the Pacers at that point. But if he is kind of alluding to that, and I think we've kind of known this, right? Kevin Pritchard talked about his conversations with Myles, in late September. None of this is really new information. It's just kind of coming out piecemeal, more and more details. I think this makes the trade seem even more likely, and I already thought the likelihood was pretty high. But if they're, if he's saying it makes sense for the Pacers to not lose him for nothing, and if he's kind of subtext of talking about extensions, saying in the end, I'll probably be exploring the market, the Pacers absolutely have to consider dealing him at some point this season. That's not new, but hearing all this stuff come from his mouth is certainly interesting and unique in the landscape of the NBA. Now, let me talk about one more angle from this. You have to listen to this all yourself, form your own opinions. This is just what I kind of was thinking doing this as I typed notes. I have a story up in Forbes about it, as well as in SI, although from a different approach of, the season starting and this topic coming right back up. But, an interview like this, where Turner comes out and says all this stuff about, his situation, the Pacers situation, the Lakers situation, is interesting, of course. But he also said, he still feels like he's scratching the surface of his potential. And part of the reason a trade could happen and make sense for the Lakers is because he's good. And stuff like that feels like it should be met with a really solid performance. And Myles was really bad against the Nets tonight. Really bad. Well, last night for you listening, Carlisle benches him for the final couple of minutes of a very close game. He was 7 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, minus 21. Minus 21. They got smoked in his minutes. It was very odd, especially early in the day. He tweeted, just listen to the podcast. I think I saw a tweet that said this. If this didn't happen, ignore this. But someone saying something about Quinn Buckner referencing that maybe it was something on his mind during the game. Like a very odd dynamic there of this coming out on the same day. And so fans who already have an issue with a player going on a podcast and talking about trades so openly, right? If you're a Myles Turner fan, you hated to hear him talk about trades so openly, right? And if you're not a Myles Turner fan, you hate to hear a player on your favorite team talk about trades so openly because you want your team to do well and get the best stuff possible. It's just odd for fans. Like this thing, even if every single thing he said, I believe, was correct and a very well thought out opinion and a very well spoken opinion. I'm throwing absolutely no shade at what Myles Turner said or the questions proposed to him, but I think fans would not like to hear it, and that's why it's an odd dynamic of on the same day that something that would rub fans the wrong way comes out, he has a really rough game. So in conclusion, I have way too many notes from this. Even if it was A, him answering exactly what was asked and doing a good job of it, B, Woj reporting on stuff that people are interested in with Turner, and C, Myles Turner said nothing incorrect, right? He is in a contract here. The Pacers should consider exploring trades for him. The Lakers should consider trading for him. The Pacers are this young, up-and-coming team. He's a vet on this team. He feels like he can get better. None of this is wrong. It's all very correct. It's all part of the business of the game that Turner knows so well. It's just how an interview like this is going to go. It's going to naturally make some people feel differently about the situation when it's trade stuff and when fans are involved and when fandom is involved. So it's just odd because it's very rare that the topic is broached so openly and aggressively, and especially that early in the interview. But I really think credit to Woj for getting these questions out in a way that was comfortable, that Myles felt like answering them in this way too. It was just different. But I think everybody should listen to it. I think they both did a great job explaining the motivations of everyone, and Turner did a good job promoting both himself and the Pacers despite the sort of oddness of the whole situations. And he'll need to play better going forward. He'll need to play more games like he played last Friday instead of like the one he played on Monday against the Nets. And speaking of the Nets, let's dive right into that game. Hey guys, let's take one short little break before talking Pacers Nets so I can talk to you about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every potential new hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to make a post and hire on LinkedIn Jobs. You post your job on there. Once you add it, you make this little purple hiring frame around it so that LinkedIn profile can spread the word that you're hiring, and they have simple tools like screening questions. They make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Easy peasy. Your second listen should be Locked On Nets. Hear from the Brooklyn Nets guys as they break down how the Nets, with no Ben Simmons, bounced back, beat the Pacers, although almost not, after how last Saturday's game went. Obviously, we'll talk about Turner a little bit here, but I just covered him for the whole first segment. Let's talk about the game in general and what happened, because this was both exactly like a lot of Pacers games and totally different from a lot of Pacers games this season at the same time. So this is the part that was exactly like a lot of Pacers games this season. Stop me if you've heard this. Pacers started horrible. It's been a huge problem for this team this year, and it's mostly been defensively, right? They have really struggled to get stops. They gave up 33 points the first quarter, but what they haven't struggled with a lot to start games, or really at all this season, is offense. And they only scored 18 points in the first quarter. They dug themselves a huge hole on both ends. Everybody was struggling to get good looks. The Nets came out really motivated after this players-only meeting they're having after only 6 games. Pacers only had 4 guys hit shots in the first quarter. They shot 34%. And obviously, this is something I talked about on yesterday's show. Of course, a team's going to look good when they shoot 50% from 3 2 games in a row. In the first quarter of Pacers Nets, the Pacers shot 0 for 12 from deep. They were completely terrible for the first 14 and a half minutes of this game. And if you looked up at the score with 9:30 to go in the second quarter, the Pacers were down 48-24. They're being doubled up by Brooklyn. It looked horrible. It looked like the Nets were responding so well to the Pacers crushing them on Saturday. And then, for the next 33 and a half minutes, the Pacers dominated this basketball game. They were so much better than the Nets for the final 33 and a half minutes. But guess what? You don't get wins for being better for 33 and a half minutes. You get wins for being the better team over the course of the whole game. And the Pacers, despite coming back really strong to close this game, they actually tied it up at 100 apiece. They could not hold on to get the win. So despite their impressive ending, it was not enough to actually get the win. They were significantly better for the rest of the game, as they have been so often, right? Opening night lost to the Wizards, they were better in the second half. Against the Spurs, they lost, they were better in the second half. They were about even with Philly in the second half. They lose all those games because they have had such poor starts all the time. Everything was so broken early in this game, but they figured it out after missing all 12 threes in the first quarter and not defending anything. The big turning point was one specific player, and it's not a guy who's been the turning point at all this season. It was Chris Duarte. Chris Duarte, best game of his season. In fact, I would let you say best game of his career. 30 points for Chris Duarte, and he goes off in the second quarter of this game to get the Pacers back into it. 11 points in the second quarter, 3 of them from deep, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, plus 15. 11 points for Duarte in that quarter. He had 13 points at halftime, which sounds like not a lot, but that would be his season high in scoring just at the half, right? He's only scored 10 in one game this year. He scored 12 in Chicago. He had 13 at the half, right? So absolutely awesome first half from Chris Duarte, but he had an awesome half in that Chicago game, if you'll recall. I didn't want to get too far ahead of myself. He needs to keep going, but he helped the Pacers get down. I think the lead was 9 for the Nets at halftime. He was awesome in that quarter, but he's got to keep it going, right? The threes were going down. He was 5 for 5 from twos from the second quarter onward, but they've got to be more, figuring it out going forward. Well, then in the third quarter, Chris Duarte was also awesome. 15 points, 5 for 6 from the field. He had 3 2-pointers. Awesome quarter from him. He was so much of the Pacers offense. Him and Ben Mathurin were 26 of the Pacers' 31 points in the third quarter. Duarte was being so much better at being aggressive, getting all the way to the rim, and finding his spots. Mathurin had that good third quarter, and Buddy Hield was really solid as well, as he was all road trip. And when Mathurin has another 16-point game, it was troubling in this one because Haliburton seems like the guy you've got to play to be your engine, and Buddy Hield was their most consistent source of offense over the last 5 games. Chris Duarte's having a career night. So those three guys seem like they have to be out there, but then how do you get Mathurin in the game? It seems like they should have gone smaller, but with Durant and Claxton out there, it's really hard to defend. And like Jalen Smith was having an okay defensive night. It was kind of hard to get the rotation down. And we'll talk about the rotation a little in the third segment. But it was tricky. And so I don't think Mathurin played enough, but I don't know who I would take him out for, which is why it's hard for me to just say he should have played more. That's not fair criticism. But tricky there. Either way, Mathurin was good. Hield was good. Duarte was absolutely exceptional. And that is the end of the Pacers' list of players who reached expectation in this basketball game. Like we already talked about in the first segment, Myles Turner was not good. This was the worst Jalen Smith game in a while. Jalen Smith was kind of invisible at times this game. And let me be clear, I mean on offense, because defensively, especially in the first half, he did a pretty good job defending Kevin Durant, which is very hard, which sounds hilarious to say, because Kevin Durant had 36 points in this game. But it felt like he was at least making it hard for him. Credit to Jalen Smith. It's got to be hard to do that on both ends. He only took 4 shots. He has to be exhausted. But the front court pairing and the starting 5 combined for 10 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 assists. Neither of them gave the Pacers enough. And this was Halliburton's worst game of the year as well. He was 4 for 11, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, a season low there, 7 turnovers, right? They were pressuring him a lot on Saturday. This time it got to him a little more. He was a little sloppier. Definitely his worst game of the season. And so they had 2 good starters and 3 terrible starters. That's not a good balanced starting lineup. All of them, except for Duarte, negative in the plus-minus department. So some good performances from the bench. I suppose James Johnson was pretty effective, and TJ McConnell hit half his shots, but nobody was really up to standard, right? O'Shea Brissett's minutes went poorly, but Tadze's minutes went poorly. Nembhard missed his only shot of the game. Isaiah Jackson could have had a good game, but he ended up getting hurt and not playing enough. So Pacers just did not get enough from absolutely everyone else. So 3 good guys, good performances, but from Mathurin, Hield, and Duarte, and everyone else was substandard, and that needs to be a little bit better in this game. And one more takeaway before we talk about Duarte's big game and James Johnson playing a lot in the rotation in general at the power forward spot. The Pacers got beat up in this game. Part of the Nets' sort of transformation to go from whatever happened to them on Saturday to playing better and being more spirited and responding was being more physical. And I don't think it was anything egregious, to be totally clear. Nothing egregious, just it was a very physical game. And for the Pacers, who were playing their 3rd game at 4th nights, their 4th game in 6 nights, and all these games are road games, taxing times. They did get to stay in Brooklyn for 3 days, which helps a little bit, but taxing times and a physical game. A lot of scrapes to keep an eye on in this game. Duarte was limping at one point, even though his game was absolutely fantastic. Halliburton even had like a moment of limp in the game, but he played the whole time. Isaiah Jackson had a knee injury in the middle of the game. He was questionable to return, and then he did return, and then after he returned, he came out and never came back in because of his knee injury. Somebody else was limping too that I now am completely spacing somehow. But the Pacers really got Ben Mathurin, his wrist got hurt. He had a brace on it after taking some free throws. It was not his shooting wrist, which is noteworthy, but I mean they just got beat up in this basketball game. So that'll be a thing to note, I think, going forward. But also on the bright side of that, for the Pacers' perspective, they don't play till Friday. They have 3 days off. They'll probably travel a day home. I wouldn't be surprised if they got 2 days off, and then they get a practice day to kind of tune up and get healthy before they play Miami on Friday. So a lot of physical stuff in this game, but the Pacers have time to get past it and get right ahead of finally being back at home after an 8-game road trip on Friday against Miami. Let's talk about Chris Duarte's huge game. What was good about it? What can he replicate? Because like I said, his high before that, he only had exceeded 10 points once before tonight, and he'd only exceeded, and it was a 12-point game, and he beat that in the first half. What did he do so well in this game? Can he repeat it? Plus a few stray thoughts on the front court rotation from this game. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Sports Today, new project here from the Locked On Podcast Network. The biggest stories of every day with instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available in the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. Check out Locked On Sports Today. Let's dive into this game from Chris Duarte. Checked out all his shots again after the game. Watched all his on-ball possessions. And the question has to be for the Pacers, who, besides this game, have been getting consistent Halliburton production, consistent Mathurin production mostly, and mostly consistent Hield production. How can they get one more guy going on either end of the floor? Duarte seems like a natural candidate to be that on offense, with Turner being the candidate on defense, but Duarte hasn't been that guy. And I did a segment on this last week. I thought his shot profile was good. They would go in eventually, and this game they finally did. But I think that this game he also changed a little bit about him. So I was wondering when I went back and watched, was it something about his matchup, sometimes guarded by Kevin Durant, who's enormous, sometimes guarded by Royce O'Neal, who's a really good defender. What did he do well? Was it just a hot shooting game? Well, no, it wasn't. There were a couple things he did differently that I would like to see him continue to try to do. One of them was drives. And this is something that really behooved Caris LeVert, and that LeVert actually ended up going away from a little bit. But LeVert would work with the coaching staff on this too, especially at his tail end of this time with the Pacers. On his drives, Caris LeVert loves the floater, or loves to like shimmy and shoot over people. And Duarte likes to do that a little too in the mid post or from the baseline. 10-footers. They're not bad shots. Those guys are okay at hitting them. That's why they take them. But Duarte in this game, all the way to the rim. Every single shot he took inside the arc in this game was at the rim, except for one, which was a pull-up 23-foot jumper over Kevin Durant, and he drilled it. So I think that was something encouraging. He said he was getting all the way to the rim, and Halliburton talked earlier this season about how, one of Duarte's evolving advancements, I just lost how to talk, is that when he's doubled or when he runs into traffic, he's a little better at passing, but he likes to turn back from the basket first so he can go to that fadeaway. But if he gets all the way to the rim, turning back to the basket, there's more space for passes, there's more room to do stuff. Just one extra dribble goes a long way for a lot of these guys as they work on their counters, and I think that was there for Chris Duarte in this game. That's something I think he's got to keep doing for him, is just keep getting in deeper. And the other thing was, he's taken a lot of open shots this year. That's what I talked about in a segment when talking about why I believed he would bounce back eventually last week. A lot of the shots he was taking were open. In fact, a higher percentage of his shots this season, at the time I did this segment, I haven't checked recently, and last year he was taking a higher percentage of open shots this year than last year. In this game, Chris Duarte took not only open shots, but catch and shoot shots, limited dribbling. 5 of his 8 threes were catch and shoots. And you might look at the box score and say, well, Tony, he took 10 threes. 2 of his threes were heaves. One was a 60-footer, and one was like a 35-footer at the end of the third quarter. He actually made the one at the end of the third quarter, but of his 8 within normal possession three-pointers, 5 of them were catch and shoots. 2 of the 3 that weren't were off of 1 dribble, or 2 dribbles. So better there. I think that in more control will help him get some confidence up before taking some of those more advanced shots that I think he can make. Like, I still think he projects to be a 3-and-D kind of player, but right now, especially when he's been off, maybe settling in for more shots like that, he got a lot from the left corner, would be really good for him. So catch and shoots, get all the way to the rim. His shot diet was really special in this game, and that led to, more confidence, more attacks, and things like that. So I think that's key for him. On top of continuing to take those open shots, just keep finding, good possessions where he can get to the rim, and keep finding possessions where he could be a catch and shoot threat. He's done a little bit too much experimenting with the handle, I think, at times this season, making his open shots a little more difficult than they need to be. One more straight thought from this game to close out the show today. James Johnson. I like James Johnson. James Johnson's this enforcer-type player, the element that the Pacers have been missing from a toughness perspective in recent seasons. He's talented. He was in the Nets, who the Pacers just played, rotation all of last year. He played, I think, 70 games for them. They ended up making the postseason, right? He was good enough to be on that team for a while, although they did cut him right before the playoffs. And he was good in this game. Let me get ahead of anything I would say here. He was good in this game. Led the Pacers in plus 14. He did foul out, but only 4 points. But still, that enforcer type, that push the ball when he gets the rebound type, can flip it around, right, and be that tough enforcer on D. That's a valuable player. I do not want to say that this is a why is James Johnson on the court at all segment. He was fine in both of these games in Brooklyn. And, but the gap between him and the other forwards who are young, even when James Johnson's playing well, is not very big. And so I'm kind of surprised to see him play significantly more than some of the other fours on this team, right? O'Shea Brissett plays 3.5 minutes in this game. Terry Taylor did not play a single second in this game. And that is pretty, even though I don't think anyone thinks differently than this, both O'Shea and Terry Taylor haven't really done a whole lot in their minutes here. They haven't really put their stamp on the game, in the way that O'Shea did his first year with the Pacers and Terry Taylor did. It's sometimes, even in the preseason this year, that hasn't really happened for them. And yet I still think it makes more sense for the Pacers. James Johnson's on a 1-year deal. He's not like absolutely game-changing. He's 35. It seems like they should be rolling with the young guys a little bit more in this game, even if, again, James Johnson was really good in this game. Plus 14 enforcer against a Nets team that does not want to be enforced. They do not want a guy like that opposite them in the game. But the gap between even good James Johnson and those two young forwards is not big enough for me to justify, in my head, him playing 15 minutes more than either of them, right? And credit to him, he did well in those minutes, but that is a big gap. Like, even going back to Saturday's game, I remembered all 3 of them played in that game, which, again, is fine to see all 3 of them out there, but he was closer to them in minutes that game, right? Even though he still played, I think, a dozen more than them. It was closer in that one. I think they all played against the Wizards for at least a little bit as well. I did not check those minutes when prepping for this segment. Sorry for that noise. I just knocked my mic over while talking. But I was surprised to see how many more minutes he played than them in this particular game. And I don't really understand the long-term utility of that, even if he is playing well in the specific game. Oh, yeah, none of them played against the Wizards. That's what it was. I did actually remember that. So the front court rotation has just been kind of all over the place. And I remember when Rick Carlisle started Terry Taylor at first to start the season against the Wizards, it was kind of matchup-based, right, with Kuzma. Maybe it's a matchup thing with the Nets and not with the Wizards because he didn't play any of them against Washington. I haven't gotten to talk to Rick Carlisle since last Wednesday when they're on the road. I can't travel yet. So I don't know the answers to these questions. I would like to find them out. But I am surprised how much more James Johnson is playing with these other guys than these other guys who are younger. That doesn't seem like the right long-term approach, even if he is doing well in his minutes in the short term. Again, James Johnson was good in this game, push and transition, nice defense. He's a good utility player, right? Some team in the NBA should have minutes for him. He did well in both of these games against his former team. I just feel like they should be minutes that are given to younger Pacers. But I digress. He played well. It's just me opining about a small thing in the rotation. And to be fair, with Myles playing poorly, with Isaiah Jackson leaving with an injury, and Goga not particularly playing well in this game, they needed front court depth in this game. I was just surprised to see how wide the gap was in minutes between, some of the promising, at times, young forwards and James Johnson in this game. But I digress. We'll see if that continues. And again, he did play well. He is, on merit alone, he is deserving of minutes, and he was in these games. We'll continue talking Pacers all week. Tomorrow, or today if you're listening Tuesday, is Mad Ants Media Day, so I'll cover a little bit of that. I'll probably talk with Gabe York and Justin Anderson, some Pacers from last year, about their time with the team, and try to get some interviews to land on the show. We'll talk more about the Pacers season so far as well tomorrow, and then later this week, Dave Sorrell is going to join us, Miller Time Pod, for some early season impressions for the Pacers. And then Friday, of course, we're talking Heat, Pacers season, all sorts of good stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers that you won't want to miss. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great rest of your day. We will see you tomorrow.